So I think we'll start now just to welcome you all. I'm delighted that we have so many registered over, I think it's 140 today have already registered, and we're expecting more than 100 to be online. Just to mention that the session is being recorded, and this is only the presentation sections that will be available to view online after this. So for those colleagues who weren't able to join the live stream today, or for your colleagues that might like to look back if they didn't have an opportunity to register, it would be great to go to the IUA website, and you'll be able to find the recording of the presentations from today. So I'm delighted that so many have joined us, and they're from universities, institutes of technology and TUs from across the country, which is great, and also from government departments and agencies. So we're really pleased to have so many. Today's session is about the reform of research assessment. It's one of the 20 ERA actions taking place, and it is a massive undertaking, I think we'll all agree. Many see the benefit of doing this, but it shouldn't be underestimated about how difficult and challenging that would be. And what we're hoping to do today is to provide some clarity and also to have some useful discussion. We are joined by my colleagues here from Ireland, Professor Jim Lindsay from the University of Galway, who's VP for Research and Innovation there, and Dr. Jennifer Brennan of thea, who is the Director of Research, Innovation and Engagement. And then from the EUA side of things, we are very lucky to have with us Stefan Bergman, who is the Director of Research and Innovation for the EUA, and his colleague and deputy, Vinciane Gallia. So what I would like to do now at this stage is to ask Jim if he would kindly turn on his screen, and I'll mute myself and black myself out, and I'll hand over to Jim. Thanks very much, Jim.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. It's always odd to be speaking to a void, but I know there's quite a few people out there. I want to do three things in the 10 minutes that I have. First of all, I want to give a brief overview of where we are in terms of research assessment in Ireland at the moment. And I want to talk a little bit about the prospective changes that the HEA Act are bringing to bear, how the COARA process interacts with that, and I'm going to give a few notes very quickly at the end to give some examples from our own practice in Galway in how the COARA process is helping inform our own forms of research assessment. So going to what we do now, we will all be aware that there isn't a national research assessment framework, that we don't have a ref or anything like that. However, we are obliged to perform forms of quality assurance in each of our separate universities, and those have been developed over a series of years. I think the relevant stuff recently are the HEA QQI memos of understanding, the ones that went from 2015 to 2017, the one from 2018 to 2020. And these were aimed to create mission-based performance compacts and institutional performance frameworks, so that we understood where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do, and whether we're getting there. For research, research was called out, but it's called out in a very particular way. So the key phrase, it was excellent research development. That was the QQI I was interested in. But here's how it's phrased. Innovation, this is what we're supposed to assess, we're supposed to go for. Innovation that has relevance, growing engagement with external partners, and impact for the economy and society, and strengthens our standing in the to become an innovation leader in Europe. Now, what I want you to notice is that the heading was excellent research development, but what's actually called out twice is innovation, right? And that's been very important for national policy, and it has been, I think, the key word in the frameworks thus far. So we'll see the same thing in the other areas that we've all been working with over the past decade. So our KTI assessment frameworks, the metrics, which we'd all be familiar with, which is a very developed system that SFI have got, and there's a practice and culture of research and assessment in SFI that's really well embedded. We have the Horizon Europe targets, so they're quite metricized, and they're quite innovation focused as opposed to research focused. Okay, if one accepts that as a distinction, I think we'd have to talk about that a little bit more. So that was where we are thus far. And I think every university has its own internal system then for meeting all those demands and maintaining a robust and coherent form of research management and research assessment. In Galway, we do it iteratively on a 7-year cycle, an internal review of research performance, very much based on the REF model. Okay, and that meets both our goals in order to have critical self-reflection on ourselves, but also to maintain our accountability to the various bodies like the HEA, who have oversight of our activity. That's all going to be overhauled, overturned, and revamped in the new system performance framework that is envisaged in the HEA Act that's just been passed, and I think just been signed by the President in the past few weeks. So what we are now in the state of is we're looking at developing performance agreements which are flexible, these are the themes, flexible, responsive, thematic, strategic, and evidence-based, right? And for us, I think as a system, we have to see and have to be confident that the COARA process is fit for purpose to produce those outcomes, that we will meet those standards and values. And there's a bit of work to do. If we were to look, let me share my screen here for a second. If we're to look at the draft system performance framework, you see research and innovation is one of the columns, right? One of the key themes in the system performance framework. And it cuts across the transitional themes, right? Skills, sustainability, student success, enterprise and society, regional goals, digital transformation, institutional culture. And if you notice in some of those crossing boxes, Impact 2030, creating our future is of course called out, and that's ongoing at the moment. But if you look at Impact 2030, it calls this process out. So there's a bit of circularity in there. And what the COARA process is going to allow us to do is to fill in some substantive way what the actual metrics and the actual processes we're going to use to fulfill these necessary and substantive goals. Okay. The other piece that's relevant in our future performance, I think, is the Irish ERA commitments. I personally regret that we haven't committed to any of the actions between 13 and 19, which are the excellence actions and the more basic research focused actions. And I think that's a national discussion we need to have. I think that we've committed to action 3 is really, really important. And this is part of that focus, of course. And I think as well, the existence of the FERRES as a coordinating body through which these conversations and these reflections can take place, and we can work together. And particularly, I'm going to call out an individual, Deirdre Lewis' role and her role in evidence for policy, I think is so crucial, right? That we will now be able to feed back into the system or reflection on how the system is working. Okay, so we've had a practice. We're moving toward a reform of that practice, but that is not the whole story, I think, on our current and future relationship in the country, because of course, being so close to the UK, an awful lot of us are incredibly familiar with REF, and we use 4-star, 3-star, 1-star as if those were, completely obviously meaningful things. We talk about impact, we talk about environment, we talk about outputs. We haven't, a lot of us have been part of that system. And that's, I think, set our heads around thinking about metrics and thinking about how you do research assessment in a particular way. And my own view is that the COARA process is a necessary corrective to us thinking through that in more creative ways. The way in which you talk about the community of investigation rather than the discipline, and that there's a more Einsteinian model of the complex world out of which research emerges, rather than a kind of Newtonian model where research happens and then there's impact. So the work that's been done in Ireland, and a lot of it by the IUA in collaboration with the universities on engagement rather than on impact, I think is really important, and we will have huge voice as a system speaking into the co-IRA process, because I think there's real maturity in thinking around that and how that works. So finally, then moving to some tougher questions. I think for most of us in Ireland reading through the co-IRA documents, we would wish there to be a bit more comfort with the use of metrics, frankly, right? For a small system, we need there to have benchmarking in there. And particularly, and this I think a lot of folk would agree with, for EDI purposes, we need to be able to have forms of evidence that we feel are totally robust, which cut across various other characteristics and are mobilizable, right, in order to stop what can be crowding effects and kind of impression effects. While so the centrality of peer review, I think we would all endorse, right? However, that has to be measured. That peer review has to be, as it were, read against forms of metrics that are not vulnerable to opinion, right? Then finally, I'm going to take one more minute. I know I'm over my time. I'm so sorry, Lisa. This is already having a huge effect for us in Galway. We had such a robust, with the research committee 2 days ago, really robust conversation about how co-IRA is going to be embedded in our practice as we do our own IRP. One of the key things is moving from the REF model, where only full-time staff are allowed to be counted, as it were, for the purposes of looking at research outputs, given the greater numbers of contract researchers per head of staff in Ireland. That's not fit for purpose. That doesn't capture the Irish research environment. Therefore, we're looking to broaden our understanding of who is a researcher and what that goes in. And the way in which we also conduct and how we select our reviewers for peer review. We're hoping to use the European Universities Initiative and our own Enlight network as our preferred framework through which we would draw reviewers, so that our assessment procedures and our assessment standards are benchmarked against practice across Europe in a way that we all mutually learn from one another. And that nests, I think, beautifully within this process. So finishing, from the Irish perspective, I think this offers us huge opportunities. There are challenges because there are things that are important to us that are not, I think, as called out as we would want them to be in the document. We, I think, have an innovation-focused system, and we have to now, as it were, universities have to gain their space to say, yes, the state is very interested in innovation, but we're also interested in the more excellence and research-based stuff. So this research process won't just align with the national process. It will be benchmarked across a broader, I think, international set. And that's to the good, because we live in both environments. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks as always for giving such a comprehensive overview, and always honing in as well on the tough questions and the areas that we really need to look at and to try and come together with solutions for. There'll be questions and answers. If anybody would like to add questions to the Q&A or chat box, I can ask them. We'll also have a few attendees coming online to ask a number of questions. But at this stage now, I'd like to hand over to Jennifer Brennan of thea.
Thanks very much, Lisa, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come here today virtually to speak to the attendees. I'd like to say, first of all, a really strong welcome for the Coalition and the statement on reforming research assessment. I think personally, I've had an interest in this area for quite some time, and I've been following it, and it's great to see this initiative leading the way at EU level. I'm going to talk mostly about how this particular aspect of performing research assessment comes at a time of reform and transformation for the technological higher education sector, comprising the technological universities and institutes of technology. And I think if we look back to 2017, 5 years ago, when I took up this role, we had a very different sector. So we had 14 institutes of technology located across the whole of the country. And today in 2022, 5 years later, we now have 5 multi-campus technological universities, very much with a strong but quite wide regional spread, and 2 IoTs. And as I said, these institutions are really undergoing their own transition, transformation and reform. They're trying to find their place, understanding the difference between what it means to be a technological university versus an institute of technology, and also the difference between a technological university and the universities that have been around for decades. And I see that myself that this will probably take maybe 10 or 12 years before these institutions really bed down and find their place and understand their place strongly and are strongly, I suppose, synced within the national research and higher education system. When I look at that transformation from my own point of view as Director of Research and Innovation, one of the biggest changes in moving from an IoT to a TU is the amount of research and innovation activity that they're expected to do. And there are actually specific metrics in the legislation that underpins the technological universities that you have to meet, research and innovation metrics before you even become a TU, and also that will be monitored afterwards up to 10 years after the TUs are formed. And looking at what that research is about, for me, there's kind of two defining characteristics: that there's a real strong partnership approach and there's a very strong regional approach. Many of these institutions are the only kind of higher education and research provider in the areas that they are located in. We're known particularly for working very strongly with industry, particularly small and medium enterprises. And I guess because of that, publications in academic journals haven't always been the most high priority research outputs for our sector's researchers. We would also have a strong stream of grey literature, of consultancy reports for industry, for community organisations, of working on studies and reports for local government, for example. Although publications in academic journals are becoming more important, and we're trying to do that in the most open access way possible, aligning with our National Open Research Strategy. Coming back to kind of achieving those research and innovation goals, I'd like to talk about a particularly necessary piece of reform in the sector and how this links into research assessment reform. So at the moment, the academic contract in our sector is not really fit for purpose for a more research intensive environment that we want to have in technological universities. Our workload allocation for academic staff is solely based on the number of teaching hours they deliver, although many of them are involved in research through buying out those teaching hours. And all of our recruitment and promotion is based on that. It's based really on teaching objectives. And we don't have a professoriate, and we currently don't have really a track for promotion for research active academic staff. All of our promotions now are to academic management roles, such as head of department or head of school. And it's really good that our new department is, of course, really aware of this. And last year, they commissioned the OECD to carry out a review of the academic contract and career pathways. And the OECD reported earlier this year, they have a series of recommendations for change, which are currently being considered by government. And this would include the development of a professoriate, of academic career pathways, including research, and a workload allocation model that's really based on a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 model of research, teaching and service to the academic community. And so I guess we eagerly await the outcome of the government's deliberations on this, and we look forward to working with them to sort of implement those necessary changes to sort of catalyse and open up much more research activity from our academic staff. But this period of flux kind of offers an opportunity when it comes to research assessment reform. So because we haven't historically recruited and promoted our researchers with a strong focus on research impact, we have the opportunity to become early adopters of research assessment reform, looking at the COARA statement and commitments, the good practices that will arise from it as we reform our academic contract and we change our career paths within the sector. We don't have to unwind, I suppose, decades of existing practice for assessing researchers. And actually, some of our members are already adopting some of these, I suppose, more modern and up-to-date practices. So I'd like to just call out the former Waterford Institute of Technology, now South East Technological University, who were an early signatory of DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. And they have been using that recently in their own processes for internal funding and also their annual research awards, which I was delighted to attend a couple of weeks ago. And we'd like to see that kind of forward thinking across all of the higher education institutions in Ireland. So I guess for me, it's really essential that that latest thinking on research assessment reform is embedded in that process of reforming the academic contract and career pathways in our sector. And that will need buy-in from all parties. I think the institutions, you can probably say we are bought into it. But it will also need other parties such as the trade union that represents academic staff who may not be very up to speed with what's going on in research assessment reform. Why would they be? And also our department, but of course understanding that the research policy people who understand this won't necessarily be in the room for these negotiations. So we need to make sure that their learnings and their knowledge is spread around the wider department when they're looking at the higher education sector as a whole. But looking nationally, it's not going to be sufficient for institutions themselves to reform how they do research assessment. And I suppose I note that the COARA agreement includes statements around how research projects and research performing organizations themselves are evaluated. And one of their commitments asks us to recognise the diversity of contributions to and careers in research in accordance with the needs and nature of that research, including the valuable contributions that researchers make to science and for the benefit of society, including diverse outputs beyond journal publications. And that bit about diverse outputs beyond journal publications is really of key importance to the technological higher education sector. And because of the nature of the research and innovation that we do, you know, that propensity towards grey literature, reports, etc., and not, I suppose, a reliance on high impact publications. And we need to see a shift at national level, I suppose, away from relying on publication metrics as the way that we assess the quality of researchers. And I don't mean all publication metrics, but maybe ones that are a little lazy, and things like the journal impact factor, which we know isn't really a measure of how good a journal is. And I'd like to commend Science Foundation Ireland in particular and other research funders for the work that they've done in adopting things like DORA and the resume for researchers. And I suppose we'd like to see that kind of forward thinking in all areas of research assessment reform, including, as Jim highlighted, the revised system performance framework. So this really needs to be a whole of system approach involving our department, all of our national research funders, even those nothing to do with the Department of Further and Higher Education, and the HEA, QQI, everybody, and the institutions themselves. We all need to pull together in the one direction. For me, of course, research assessment is really strongly linked with the open research movement. And, you know, it's clear that the work of the National Open Research Forum will become increasingly important to institutions and to the other players within the system. And it's great to see that in the new National Open Access or Open Research Action Plan that's going to be launched on Monday, research assessment reform features very strongly. And the National Research Integrity Forum, which I'm involved in, is also interested in this area because it does cross over between open research and research integrity. And our steering group will meet in December, and we're going to have a briefing actually from Stefan and also the National Open Research Coordinator, Daniel Bangert. So we're keeping an eye on this important area. So just to conclude, the Technological Higher Education Association and the sector that we represent really strongly welcomes the QARA agreement. As an umbrella organisation, thea is discussing actually signing up to the agreement ourselves, and we'll also be strongly encouraging our members to be signatories and also to get involved in the coalition and the various working groups and activities that will kick off in the coming months. Thanks very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Jennifer. I think what's becoming clear is that with regard to the reform of research assessment, this is very much, you know, there's different national perspectives, there's different sectoral perspectives, but also different institutional ones. So it is quite complex. And thanks, Jennifer, for explaining and laying that out so clearly for everybody, and the different aspects that we need to consider. I'm going to hand over now to Vinciane Gallia from the European Universities Association, the EUA, and I'll be back shortly.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you all. I'll start by sharing my screen, and then you should see it's a big screen now. If I don't hear from you, I guess that it's okay that you see the slide. The first thing that I wanted to say is that it is a pleasure being in that workshop, because both Jim and Jennifer already, well, they said it all, the two of them. So it's really nice, because I think that indeed Jim provides a very comprehensive overview of where we are at, what are the opportunities, but the challenges. There are challenges indeed. But he sees that overall as an opportunity, linking to the discussions at the European research area level. And then we have Jennifer, who linked up to the actual first commitment and the importance of the systemic reform, the level that it's needed at systemic level. So you did our job very much easier. Thank you very much. So I'll start by doing like the slides that we have, but I'll go over some of them very quickly then. So the agreement, here it is. You have the link. It was published in July, and this is the document that both of them were referring to. And sorry about that. So the thing is that I don't see, yeah, here. Okay. Just a quick note on how we got to that document in the end, and just to indicate if you were not aware of that already, that this is the result, the outcome of a co-creation exercise. And I know that you may say, well, this is a buzzword nowadays, but I really truly believe it was, and the process itself, this is why it took us quite some time to get there. But it was a very iterative process, starting from different versions of the draft agreement, and then iterations that were submitted to a core group. We, EUA, were part of what we called the drafting team. So our mandate was to draft this agreement together with our colleagues from Science Europe, representing the research performing organizations and research funding organizations. And we were also helped in that with Dr. Karen Strobans, who is a researcher on research. And the whole process was initiated and facilitated by the European Commission. So we were the drafting team. We issued different drafts. The drafts were submitted for discussion to a core group of organizations representing the diversity of research stakeholders in Europe. And that was a group of 20. So that was already quite a sizable group, but not as big as what we called afterwards the stakeholder assembly of up to 350 organizations, having expressed their interest in the whole process, in being part of the discussion. And all those have had the opportunity to discuss, comment, and validate different versions of the agreement. And I can tell you that we have had, we received many comments, proposals, and so on. So and we have integrated them. And I think that what an highlight also is that in those assemblies, the members of the assemblies welcomed the fact that indeed we had not just, we had really listened to what they were saying and changed the document accordingly. The different versions of the document were also submitted, well, not for approval, but for information to the member states representatives in the context of the ERA Forum for Transition and the ERAC Committee. So that was the process leading to this document, which has the following structure that you see here. And I'll go to the elements of it now. First of all, this is the introduction. So the first page, you have this that is mentioned, and I think it's worth going back to that because it very much connects to what has been said before. First of all, it's that there is an agreement on the need for reform. Then there is an element on the vision, or again, sorry about this, saying that the vision for the whole thing is that the assessment of researchers and research organizations recognizes the diversity of outputs, practices, and activities that maximize the quality and impact of research. The scope is broad. It is at the level of research performing organizations and research units, at the level of research projects, individual researchers, and research teams. The idea is to set and to establish a common direction for research assessment reform practices, but of core importance is that there will be full respect of organizations' autonomy. They will retain full control in this. We commit, so we signatories commit to realize this through a coalition of the research funding organizations, research performing organizations, national or regional assessment authorities and agencies, as well as the associations of those organizations, the learned societies, the associations of researchers, and so on. And this coalition is global in scope. Going back to what was said, we will work together to enable systemic reform. There is no point of working at one level where another level that is part of the system does not work the same way, because then we will have discrepancies and frictions, let's say, in the system. But this needs to be worked all together on the basis of common principles with an agreed time frame that is part of the document. And again, I don't, sorry, I don't see the rest of it, but you can read it, the list. So the idea is to have mutual learning between all the ones interested. The time frame, you have it here. So the idea is that we you have the agreement that is available for open for signature. Signatories within 1 year, after 1 year, they are expected to have started the process of reviewing or developing criteria, tools, and processes. So within 1 year, organizations signing are expected to have identified gaps, challenges, and targets for them to work on, and so having developed an action plan for themselves that they will implement and enact within the next years. And so within 5 years or after 5 years of signatures, what is expected is that the organization has gone through at least one cycle of full review and development of own assessment criteria, tools, and processes. And of course, no need to say that if the review says that the way it is organized, it's valid and appropriate, well, there is no need to change it. Another element that is important, there is no limit in time in when is it that you have to sign if you are considering signing. It is open for signatures, and the count of year 1 and year 5 is just based on when the organization has signed. And I'm surprised because indeed we don't go over the different commitments, but this is because you have a fairly good notion of all those commitments in the document. The opening of the agreement for signatures was organized at the occasion of the European Research and Innovation Days by the end of September. And in the meantime, we are now close to, well, a bit over 300 signatories, and with a very good share of universities, as you can see here. So these are now being processed in terms of their validation. And so this is why you have here a higher number than what you could see from the QARA website, where only the ones that have gone through the full validation are presented, and we have some backlog work to do on this. In terms of the countries, so you have here the country distribution. You can see that Ireland is towards the middle here in terms of the number of signatories. These are the numbers from yesterday. If we focus on universities and their associations, you see that, well, it's the 55% share that I mentioned. We have in total 56 universities and 10 national rectors conferences. And we have also other university networks, as EUA, for instance. So in total, it amounts to 176. And now I hand over to Stefan for the QARA itself.
Thank you very much, Vinciane. And again, from my side, also thank you very much to all of you for being here today, and also for the organization of this workshop. It's always a wonderful opportunity. So the next part is just to let you know that since we published the agreement on the 20th of July, we haven't been waiting. What we started working on is actually after the, after the agreement itself, is how the coalition itself is going to work. So we work on the governance and how that's going to go forward. So next slide. So of course, everything, and I insist, all the information you might need or want to know about is on the QARA website that has been live for quite a while. And that includes, by the way, an FAQ that will answer many of the questions you might have, because we try to update it with new questions we get all the time. Next slide. The principles, actually, that are guiding the coalition itself and how it should move forward are in the agreement. And you will not be surprised. I don't have time to go into the details here, but you won't be surprised about what is in there. Obviously, openness. And it's not just openness in the sense of open access, but it's being open really to having this, to everyone to become a signatory. And that includes, of course, going global. And that's very important, as was mentioned by Vincent already. You can see that it is also about being committed to the autonomy. Here, autonomy of institutions is really a driving principle for the coalition and for the agreement, of course. And that's why, for example, you have voluntary and community-driven, because it has to be based on institution being able to volunteer, for example, working groups, and I'm going to talk about that. So again, no time to go into everything, but you have all of that in the agreement. Next slide. So what sort of bodies are we going to have within the coalition? Well, the first and most important body will be the General Assembly. And that's all the members. So you've heard Vincent, we're now above 300. We expect that by tonight deadline, there will be a few more. So the first assembly that will ever take place is going to be on the 1st of December. We do expect that this highest level decision-making body will meet once a year. But given the work that's needed in the first year, we do expect that there will be at least 3 meetings of the assembly actually in the first year in 2022. The second most important body are the working groups. I'll go a bit more into the details about that, but this is where the actual work of the coalition is going to take place. Then on top of that, you're going to have a steering board, which will be elected by the assembly. It's really a collegial body, and there it's going to be responsible not for setting, but for checking the overall oversight, the strategy, the direction in which it's going, of course, the business plan and the sustainability. So that's really important. And the way they're going to work is to mutual agreement. And then finally, there's going to be a coalition secretary who's going to be in charge of the logistics, the management, organizing conferences, the networking, etc. So those are really the bodies. Just for your information, of course, steering board nominations are, the deadline is tonight at midnight, and the call is on the COARA website. Next slide. In terms of the membership, of course, it is open to all those categories that you see in there. So universities and their associations, of course, and you can see many others. I just want to mention in this case that we are not open for profit organizations. We want this to be a community-driven initiative, really where it is open to those who are being assessed or doing assessment. And so this is where the limit comes. But again, as you can see, we're quite inclusive and open in terms of the membership. The membership currently is approved by us, EUA, and Science Europe together because we are the interim chairs. But moving forward, it will be validated by the steering board of COARA. An important point to make is that members will be able to leave the coalition at any time if they feel that that is what they wish to do. So it's not because you come in that you cannot leave at some point. Next slide. The work of the coalition, as I said, is going to take place mostly through its working groups. So these are really, as we see them, communities of practices. And they will offer the space where the mutual learning will take place and where the collaboration between the members will take place. And several types of working groups could be put in place. You could think of some that would be communities of interest, for example, but it's only an example. Peer review is going to be a very important topic, horizontal topic. So that is one, for example, over which there could be establishment of a working group. It could also be communities that are discipline-based. We know that there are differences between some disciplines when it comes to research assessment, but it could be also that interdisciplinarity is one of the working groups that will be established. Who knows? We could imagine having communities based on institution, for example, one for universities. Why not? And then an important one is going to be the communities, the national communities, because here one of the great opportunity of this coalition is that it is coming with a strong support, political support from member states and the governments. Through the council conclusion from June under the French presidency, but also through the commitment of the members of 22 member states to the ERA Action 3, which is this reform actually we know that they're ready to be in a dialogue with the national communities to be able to see what are the legal and administrative barriers that are still to be worked on at the national level. Of course, working groups, while being the most important way of working in the coalition, will not be the only ones. There will be workshops, there will be webinars, conferences, etc., that will be taking place in the future, certainly. Next slide. One question we get very often is, are we going to need to pay a fee? Well, the answer is no. The coalition will be funded actually through, first, voluntary in-kind contribution from its members. So imagine, if you sign the agreement and decide to participate in the coalition, it would make sense, of course, that you provide in-kind contribution through being part, one staff in your university, for example, being part of one of the working groups. So that's concrete voluntary in-kind contribution. Of course, we will be expecting that will be funding also coming from research funding organizations, and that is being explored right now, but also potentially also cash contribution coming from some of the members. The first one that we know is going to be coming is a WIDER call from Horizon Europe that the Commission will be publishing very soon, and that will be there to support the coalition. The models were discussed in the last stakeholder assembly in October, and of course, this is one of the votes that's going to take place actually at the Constituent Assembly on the 1st of December. Next slide. Thank you. One other question we often get is this a legally binding agreement? Well, the answer is no. No, because actually it's more morally binding agreement. Yes, there's an agreement with commitments, and of course, signing it means that it's a precondition to be able to join the coalition. And as we said, it's all based on a voluntary basis in the context of institutional autonomy for your institutions, for all the organizations who are going to sign it. Of course, you're going to retain full control. So in this case, it is really through the eye of your own community in your university, but also of the broader community, and of course of the members within the coalition that will look at you, that this is going to be morally binding. And in that sense, that's why we also say, because it's important, that as I mentioned before, you will be able to leave the coalition at any time if you wish. That said, of course, we hope you don't, and that you see the benefit in being part of the coalition. Next slide. So I'll finish now with the timeline. So as you can see, we're really far already in that timeline. We are on the 17th of November, and this is the day where we have the deadline for signing the agreement in order to be part of the first assembly, of the Constituent Assembly. The signing, of course, as it was mentioned by Vincent, will be continuing. You can sign later, not a problem. But if you want to be part of the Constituent Assembly, you have to sign by today, midnight Brussels time. It's also by today that you have the deadline for candidacy for chairs, vice chairs, and steering board members. Then on the 24th of November, we will be able to come back with all those candidates, as well as the interim secretary, and provide that to the members who will be part of the assembly on the 1st of December. And then, of course, on the 1st of December, online, we'll have the Constituent Assembly that will be chaired by the interim chairs, which is, again, EUA Science Europe. But that's where the chair, actually, the steering board, will be elected. So with that, next slide. I think I just want to insist on the fact that, of course, we at EUA consider that universities need to be part of this process. They are the ones who need to bring about the change. That's why we're doing this workshop. This is why we've done many other national workshops. That's why we have actually also had a EUA webinar series on this. That's why EUA has now committed and signed the agreement. They will be putting forward Paul Boyle, its Vice President for Research and Innovation, as a candidate for the steering board. So it is really crucial for us that universities are really actively involved in the reform. And that's why we're doing this, so that you can make an informed decision about the process. We want to make sure that universities are well represented in the future coalition, but also in the governing bodies, because it's only through this way that universities will be able to make sure that the interest of the sector is taken into account for the whole reform. So with that, next slide. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and of course, we'll be more than happy to answer many of your questions, I hope. And please be aware, we'll always be available later also if you have any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And I'd particularly like to thank you and Vincent for your contribution here, not only to today's event, but also on all the work that you've been doing on behalf of the sector, on behalf of the system across Europe. You're always consultative and collaborative in your approach, and it's really, really appreciated. And thanks so much for joining us here in Ireland today. And I know that you've been doing this across all members across Europe. So really, really appreciate that.